You probably think of Canada as maple syrup, Niagara Falls, and the Rocky Mountains. But there's a hidden side of the true north that most people never see. In the boreal forests and Arctic plains, across abandoned railway lines and beside frozen lakes, there are places that the wilderness has nearly erased. Towns where the wind moves through empty streets, settlements where only the ravens remember what once stood there, and ruins so overgrown that you'd walk past them and never know what lay beneath the moss and spruce. In this video, we are counting down 21 secret places in Canada that you've probably never heard of. Ghost towns, abandoned settlements, and forgotten corners of the country that tell stories of ambition, hardship, and the way nature always wins. So stay with me to the end, because number 1 is a place so thoroughly vanished that most Canadians don't even know it existed. Hit subscribe and let's begin. Number 21. Eglinton Ghost Town, Alberta. If you drive west from Medicine Hat on a gravel road that seems to lead nowhere, you eventually come to a clearing in the prairie where a few weathered wooden structures stand like broken teeth against the sky. It's hard to imagine that this stretch of grassland was once a thriving coal mining settlement. Eglinton sprang up in 1912 when the Canadian Pacific Railway pushed through and miners arrived to work the seams beneath the prairie. At its peak, the town had a schoolhouse, a general store, a hotel, and nearly 200 residents living in pine-board homes. Then the seams ran thin. By the 1940s, the mine was exhausted. The railway moved on. The families left. Today, if you stand in Eglinton's main street and listen, you hear only the wind cutting across the grass and the occasional creak of old timber. The schoolhouse still stands, its windows dark and empty. So hit like if you're enjoying Canada's forgotten corners. Number 20. Cayano, British Columbia. In the coastal temperate rainforests of northern British Columbia, not far from the Skeena River, sits what remains of a logging town that the forest has nearly swallowed. Cayano was built in 1918 as a camp for the Crown Zellerbach timber operation. Loggers and their families lived there, cutting old-growth cedar and spruce for the sawmills downriver. Spanish moss hung from the trees. The constant sound of cross-cut saws filled the air. But that didn't last. By the 1970s, the old-growth timber was gone, and the company abandoned the site. Today, Cayano is a tangle of moss-covered foundations and rusted machinery slowly being consumed by the rainforest. The houses have collapsed, their roofs caved in, and the dense green of the forest presses in from all sides. If you hike to Cayano today, you can still see the moss-draped skeletal frames of what were once homes. Huge cedar trees grow up through where the living room floors used to be. Number 19. Rossland Ghost Town, Yukon Territory. Deep in the subarctic forests of the Yukon, several hours north of Whitehorse, lies a place that was built on gold and abandoned when the gold ran out. Rossland came to life in 1898 during the Great Klondike Rush, when thousands of prospectors flooded north seeking fortune. Unlike Dawson City, which became famous and survived, Rossland remained small and forgotten. It had perhaps 30 buildings at its peak, a trading post, a roadhouse, a few cabins. Men panned the creeks and worked small claims hoping for the strike that would make them rich. Most never found it. By 1920, the promising creeks were exhausted. The prospectors moved on to the next rumored field. The buildings were abandoned where they stood. Now, more than a century later, Rossland is a place where permafrost shifts beneath the structures, pushing them at odd angles. Spruce trees grow right through some of the cabins. The silence is absolute except for the hum of mosquitoes in summer and the crack of ice in winter. Number 18. Wacom, Quebec. On the Ungava Peninsula in far northern Quebec, where the tundra stretches unbroken toward the Arctic, sits the remains of a Thule Inuit settlement that was occupied for centuries. Wacom was established by Europeans in the 1880s as a whaling and fur trading post. The Inuit, who had always hunted in the region, adapted, trading furs for European goods. The settlement had perhaps 100 residents at its height, but the whale populations collapsed. The fur trade shifted. The settlement became redundant. What makes Wacom unique is not a single turning point, but the layering of time. Thule artifacts beneath colonial structures, and all of it beneath the advancing tundra. If you visit today, you can still see the stone foundations of the old trading house and the remains of traditional Inuit structures beneath. The wind here is relentless and cold, even in summer. The few people who visit are researchers studying the intersection of Indigenous and colonial history. Number 17. Sandon, British Columbia. Hidden in the Kootenay Mountains of southeastern British Columbia, accessible only by hiking across a mountain pass or a rough forest road, lies the skeleton of a silver mining town that thrived for just 30 years. Sandon was established in 1891 when the Slocan silver rush brought prospectors streaming into the steep mountain valleys. At its peak around 1900, Sandon had nearly 4,000 residents, hotels, saloons, schools, a hospital, a brewery, and electric streetlights powered by a local hydroelectric plant. It was, for a moment, one of the richest small towns in Canada. Then silver prices crashed in 1893. The mines couldn't operate profitably. Slowly at first, then all at once, people left. A fire in 1900 destroyed much of the town. By 1920, Sandon was essentially empty. Today, the shells of buildings stand amid the spruce and hemlock, false-fronted storefronts, a grand hotel reduced to wooden ribs, cabins slowly collapsing into the forest floor. The creek still runs through the center where miners once diverted it for sluicing. The silence of the mountains is absolute. Number 16. Fort Washburn, Northwest Territories. On the eastern shore of the Great Slave Lake, deep in the Canadian North, lies the ruins of a Hudson's Bay Company trading post that operated for over a century. Fort Washburn was established in 1837 as a supply hub for the fur trade network that spanned the continent. Trappers would bring their winter pelts to the fort, beaver, marten, mink, fox, and trade them for supplies and goods brought from the south. The fort had stockade walls, a central trading house, housing for the factors and their families, and a warehouse where pelts were stored and pressed into bundles for shipment. The structure was built to survive Arctic winters, but the fur trade declined. By the 1950s, the post was no longer economical. It was abandoned. Now, the decaying log structures stand on the rocky shore, slowly sinking back into the land. The subarctic wind cuts across the lake. Permafrost heave shifts the buildings. The trading post, once the center of a continental economic network, is becoming rubble again. Number 15. Horsefly, British Columbia. In the interior plateau of British Columbia, in a region of sagebrush and ponderosa pine dotted with small lakes, lies the near-ghost town of Horsefly, which was once the center of a caribou gold rush. Horsefly boomed in the 1860s and 1870s when miners found placer gold in the creeks around the settlement. The town had a general store, a boarding house, several saloons, and a schoolhouse. Miners lived in cabins and tents, working the creek beds with picks and shovels. At its height, perhaps 500 people lived in and around Horsefly. But the easily accessible gold was exhausted by the 1890s. The next boom never came. A few residents stayed, maintaining the store and the schoolhouse. Many left. Today, Horsefly is barely alive. A handful of buildings remain, including the original general store, now family-owned and operating as a museum. The landscape around it is quiet, just the wind through the pines and the rush of the creek that once supported so many hopeful miners. Number 14. Island of Pines, Manitoba. On an island in Hudson Bay, more than 500 kilometers north of any significant town, lies the remains of a whaling station that operated during the height of the Arctic whale hunt. The Island of Pines station was established in 1906 by whalers pursuing bowhead and beluga whales in Hudson Bay. The station consisted of a processing plant, storage buildings, housing for the workers, and the infrastructure needed to render whale oil and prepare baleen for market. At peak operation, dozens of men worked here through the short Arctic summers, processing whales butchered in the bay, but whale populations collapsed from overhunting. By the 1930s, the station was no longer viable. It was abandoned on the island. Today, the structures are consumed by Arctic weather and time. Iron tools lie rusted on the ground. The foundations are collapsing into the permafrost. The only sounds are the wind, the calls of Arctic birds, and the occasional boom of ice shifting on the bay. Few people ever visit. The island itself is largely inaccessible except by boat during the brief open water season. Number 13. El Dorado, Ontario. In the boreal forest of northern Ontario, north of Lake Superior, lies a small settlement that sprung up around a gold mine and has been slowly returning to the forest for decades. El Dorado was established in the 1920s when a promising gold deposit was discovered. The mining company built housing, a mine office, storage facilities, and other structures needed to support several hundred workers. For nearly 30 years, ore was extracted, processed, and shipped south. The sound of the stamp mill echoed through the forest daily, but the ore grade declined. The cost of extracting gold from deeper in the earth became too high. The mine closed in the 1950s. The company dismantled some structures but left the rest. Today, El Dorado is a place where human habitation is being erased. Cabins collapse under snow load. The mine office, a substantial wooden building, lists at an angle as the forest floor beneath it settles. Moss and lichen cover everything. The forest, which humans once pushed back, is slowly reclaiming what it never truly surrendered. Number 12. Carcross Desert Settlement, Yukon Territory. In the Yukon, south of Whitehorse, lies the Carcross Desert, the northernmost desert on the continent, and surrounding it are scattered remains of settlements, tent platforms, and cabins from the Klondike Gold Rush era. Carcross itself was a major hub during the 1898 rush, a place where prospectors and supplies gathered before heading north to the creeks around Dawson. The settlement had hotels, trading posts, saloons, and housing. The nearby desert was used by prospectors and traders to dry supplies and equipment. But Carcross was always a way station, not a destination. When the rush subsided, so did the settlement. What remains scattered across the desert floor and in the surrounding spruce forest are foundations, collapsed cabins, and artifacts left by the thousands who passed through. The landscape here is stark. Vast stretches of sand dunes covered in sparse vegetation, surrounded by boreal forest. Wind moves the sand, slowly burying some structures and exposing others. It's a landscape caught between desert and subarctic forest, and the human ruins are disappearing into both. Number 11. Britannia Mine Town, British Columbia. On the slopes of Garibaldi Mountain, in the sea-to-sky corridor north of Vancouver, lies the remains of what was once the largest copper mining operation in the British Commonwealth. Britannia Mine was established in 1904 and at its peak employed over 2,000 workers. The mine had extensive underground workings, mill buildings, smelting facilities, housing for workers and their families, schools, hospitals, and all the infrastructure of a substantial industrial town built into a mountainside. The scale was immense. Mountains of tailings, enormous wooden structures, a railroad linking the mine to the coastal port. Ore was extracted continuously from 1904 to 1974, nearly 70 years of constant production. But then copper prices fell, the quality of remaining ore declined, and the economics no longer worked. The mine closed. The company gradually dismantled the most valuable equipment, but the structures were left behind. Today, Britannia is a haunting industrial ruin. Massive wooden mine buildings, weathered gray by decades of rain and coastal weather, stand in various states of collapse. The landscape is scarred by tailings ponds and open cuts. Yet nature is slowly winning. Moss and lichen cover the structures, trees grow through the buildings, and water seeps from the mine portal. If you visit today, you can still see the foundations of worker housing, the skeletal remains of massive mill buildings, and the mouth of the mine itself, dark and dripping. The scale of human ambition here is written in the size of the ruins. Number 10. Fort Providence, Northwest Territories. On the Mackenzie River in the Northwest Territories, south of Yellowknife, lies the remains of Fort Providence, a Hudson's Bay Company trading post established in 1803. Unlike some company posts that were continuously relocated, Fort Providence endured for over a century in the same location. The post was a crucial hub in the Mackenzie River fur trading system, serving trappers and indigenous hunters across a vast territory. The fort had all the standard elements: a stockaded trading house, housing for the company factors, a warehouse, workshops. The river ran in front of it, the forest pressed in from behind. During the brief summer season and the long, dark winter, traders worked here managing the flow of pelts and goods across the north. But by the 1900s, the fur trade was declining. Other posts were more efficient. Fort Providence was abandoned. Now, the log structures are partially buried in moss and forest debris. The stockade walls have collapsed in places. The Mackenzie River, which was once the center of a thriving trade network, flows past in relative obscurity. Visiting Fort Providence today, you understand the scale of the fur trade empire and how thoroughly the wilderness has reclaimed it. Number 9. Flin Flon, Manitoba. The decline. Flin Flon is not fully abandoned, but it has been slowly dying since the 1980s. The town was built entirely around copper and zinc mining on the border between Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Founded in 1915 as a mining town, Flin Flon thrived for most of the 20th century. At its peak in the 1970s, the town had nearly 10,000 residents, a vibrant main street with shops and cinemas, schools, hospitals, churches, and the infrastructure of a healthy, growing community. The mine produced immense amounts of copper and zinc, one of the richest deposits in North America. The sound of the stamp mill was constant. The town was modern, prosperous, and proud, but mineral prices are cyclical. By the 1980s, operating costs outpaced profits. The mine was producing at losses. In 1993, after nearly 80 years of operation, the mine closed permanently. The sudden loss of the town's economic foundation set off a cascade of decline. Businesses closed, people left, the population fell to a few thousand. The grand buildings of the boom years are now half empty, their facades showing wear and fading paint. The mine headframe still stands as a monument to wealth that no longer flows. If you visit Flin Flon today, you see a town caught between past prosperity and present stagnation. Proud buildings with empty storefronts, a school built for thousands now educating dozens. The wilderness waits just beyond the town limits, ready to reclaim what remains. Number 8. Port Radium, Northwest Territories. On the shore of Great Bear Lake in the Northwest Territories, more than 2,000 kilometers north of Edmonton, lies the ruins of Port Radium, a settlement built around the world's richest radium deposit. Port Radium was established in 1930 when the Great Bear Lake radium rush brought prospectors, miners, and fortune seekers to one of Earth's most remote locations. The settlement had mining infrastructure, a processing plant, housing for workers, a small airstrip, and all the necessities for human habitation in the high Arctic. Radium prices were extraordinary during the 1930s and 1940s, valuable for medical treatments and for early nuclear applications. Ore was extracted, processed on site, and flown south to refineries. For a time, the world's most valuable mineral was being mined from this frozen shore, but the radium deposits were finite. By the 1960s, mining became uneconomical. The operation ceased, the settlement was abandoned. Now, Port Radium is a place of decaying structures on the shore of a vast cold lake. The processing plant buildings are collapsing, the bunkhouses are empty and slowly sinking into the permafrost. The landscape is absolutely barren, rock, ice, and the dark water of Great Bear Lake. In winter, temperatures drop to -40 and below. Few humans ever visit. The ruins are slowly disappearing into the Arctic, and the radium that was once considered the most valuable substance on Earth is being forgotten. Number 7. Lytton, British Columbia. Before. Lytton was a living town until 2021, but it deserves a place in this countdown as a story of how quickly human habitation can be erased in Canada's wild regions. The town was established in 1860 at the confluence of the Thompson and Fraser Rivers in the dry interior of British Columbia. It was built on an ancient indigenous settlement and served as a supply center and railway junction. For more than a century and a half, Lytton survived on tourism, some light industry, and its location on the Canadian Pacific Railway. The townscape was unchanged for decades. A main street with a handful of buildings, a train station, schools, churches, and residential areas. The population stabilized around 1,500, but on June 30, 2021, a wildfire swept through the region with unprecedented speed. The town had fewer than 30 minutes to evacuate. The fire moved faster than most people could drive. 90% of the buildings burned. Lytton was nearly erased in an afternoon. Today, what remains are blackened foundations, charred trees, and the efforts of survivors to rebuild. It's a reminder that in Canada, the forces that erase human settlements, fire, flood, winter, collapse of resource extraction, can act with devastating speed. Number 6, Thelan Game Sanctuary, Lost Inuit Camps. In the barrens of the Northwest Territories, in the Thelan Game Sanctuary, lie scattered the remains of Inuit camps and settlements that were occupied for centuries before being abandoned in the 20th century. The Thelan region is one of Earth's most remote terrestrial environments, a vast expanse of tundra, muskeg, and shallow lakes hundreds of kilometers from any significant settlement. Thule Inuit and Dene peoples hunted caribou here for generations, following the great herds and establishing seasonal camps. When the caribou migration patterns changed in the early 20th century, the camps were no longer viable. Many were simply abandoned, left exactly as they were when the last hunters departed. Stone tent rings and meat caches remain. Bones and harpoon heads lie scattered. Graves marked by stone cairns dot the landscape. The artifacts tell stories of hunting camps, families, food processing, and adaptation to one of Earth's harshest environments. Today, archaeologists occasionally visit to study these sites. The tundra preserves them, the ground is frozen, which slows decay, but the Arctic wind erodes everything eventually. These camps, occupied for centuries, are slowly disappearing back into the tundra that surrounds them. Number 5. Fort Albany, Ontario. On the coast of James Bay in far northern Ontario, where the Albany River meets the bay, lies the remains of Fort Albany, a Hudson's Bay Company post established in 1679, one of the earliest and longest occupied trading posts in British North America. Fort Albany was a crucial hub in the Hudson's Bay Company's continental trade network. Furs came downriver from the vast interior. Supplies went back upriver. The fort had to be massive enough to warehouse enormous quantities of pelts and goods, yet strong enough to survive Arctic storms and the weight of winter ice. The original structure was a substantial wooden fort with stockade walls, a central trading house, workshops, and housing. The post operated continuously for nearly 300 years, from 1679 until the 1950s. But the fur trade declined. The company consolidated operations at fewer posts. Fort Albany was mothballed. Now little remains. The permafrost-plagued ground has heaved and shifted. The original structures have deteriorated beyond recognition. There is a modern small community there now, but the original fort site is mostly archaeological. Foundation stones, scattered artifacts, and the memory of 3 centuries of trading that once made this a significant place in the world economy. The isolation is near complete. The James Bay coast is one of Canada's most remote regions, accessible only by boat, helicopter, or seasonal ice road. Standing there, you understand the scale of ambition it took to build permanent structures in this frozen margin where land and sea meet. Number 4. Britannia Beach, the processing plant. While the mining town above has decayed, the processing plant at the shore level near Britannia Beach represents an even more dramatic industrial ruin. The Britannia Copper Mine's massive concentrator and flotation mill was built on the mountainside to gravity-feed ore down to the processing facility at sea level. This facility, constructed in the 1910s, was a marvel of industrial design. Multiple stories of wooden and metal structures designed to crush ore, separate copper through a flotation process, and prepare concentrate for shipment. At its height, the plant was a hive of activity. Huge machinery running, workers moving through multiple levels, a constant roar of industrial processing. But when mining ceased in 1974, the plant was stripped of most valuable equipment and left behind. The structure is enormous, easily 200 feet tall in places, sprawling along the mountainside. Much of it is in advanced decay. Wooden floors have collapsed. Metal structures have rusted into lace-like patterns. The waterfront facility, once fed by constant streams of ore, is now fed only by rainwater and snowmelt. If you visit the Britannia Beach area today, the sheer scale of what remains is overwhelming. This monumental structure built to process mountains of ore is now a monument to obsolescence. The coastal weather, fog, rain, and storm surge has accelerated the decay. Soon, very little will remain. This is industrial archaeology in progress, watching human structures being consumed by time and environment. Number 3. Aklavik, Northwest Territories, the permafrost crisis. Aklavik is a living community. There are still residents, a store, a school, and signs of habitation, but it is a place being erased by the very ground beneath it. Aklavik was established in 1912 as a Hudson's Bay Company trading post in the Mackenzie River Delta. At its peak, the community had several hundred residents, primarily indigenous peoples and fur trappers. The delta is one of North America's largest river deltas, a vast network of channels, islands, and wetlands where the Mackenzie River spreads before meeting the Arctic Ocean. Aklavik was built on permafrost, permanently frozen ground. As long as the permafrost remained stable, the settlement could endure. But the Arctic is warming faster than anywhere on Earth. Permafrost, which has been frozen for thousands of years, is thawing. The ground is becoming unstable. Buildings that were constructed on what seemed to be solid, eternal ice are sinking, listing, and cracking. The schoolhouse has tilted visibly. Homes show structural damage. The permafrost beneath the entire community is becoming unreliable. The Canadian government has recognized that Aklavik cannot be maintained indefinitely as the permafrost disappears. There is a plan to eventually relocate the community to higher, more stable ground. As of now, residents remain, but they know their settlement is being slowly erased from beneath by forces beyond their control. If you visit Aklavik, you see a community caught between past and future, a place that may not exist as a settlement in another generation, not because the people will leave, but because the land itself will no longer support them. Number 2. Wacusta, Ontario. Deep in the forests of central Ontario, hundreds of kilometers from any major city, lies the ruins of Wacusta, a planned town built in the 1920s on the dreams of a London developer who believed the Ontario interior could be transformed into farmland and small-town prosperity. The developer, a man named Thomas Hearn, bought several thousand acres and began marketing plots to settlers. He erected a few buildings, a general store, a small hotel, a grain elevator, expecting the town to grow into a regional center. He even built a railway spur to connect Wacusta to larger markets. Settlers arrived, a small community took root, but the Ontario interior is not suitable for the kind of large-scale agriculture Hearn envisioned. The soil is poor, the growing season is short, the winters are brutal. By the 1940s, it was clear that Wacusta would never be the prosperous town Hearn imagined. Residents moved away seeking better opportunities. The business that had seemed promising in the 1920s dried up. The town was gradually abandoned. Today, Wacusta is one of Ontario's most complete ghost towns. The buildings remain, the general store, the hotel, the grain elevator, weathered by decades of forest weather, but still standing. The streets are there, just overgrown with brush and young trees. The railway line is gone, but the grade remains visible running through the forest. If you hike to Wacusta, you experience a surreal landscape, a human street plan impressed on the boreal forest, nature and abandoned structures existing in an uneasy balance. The silence is overwhelming. Few people know it exists. The forest is patient, slowly working to erase the lines and structures that humans imposed on it, preparing to reclaim what it never truly lost. Number 1. Port Radium, the forgotten contamination. We return to Port Radium, the radium mining settlement on Great Bear Lake, for the final story. Not just about abandonment, but about a form of forgetting so complete that the consequences are still unknown. Port Radium was not just about mining valuable minerals. The radium extracted there, some of the world's richest radium ore, was processed on-site and shipped south for use in medical treatments and, later, in nuclear weapons programs during and after World War II. The Canadian government, working with American military interests, used Port Radium as a source of radium and, later, uranium for the Manhattan Project and beyond. The extraction and processing of radioactive materials in the extreme conditions of the Arctic left residues, uranium tailings, radium contamination, and other radioactive materials were left behind when the operation ceased. For decades, Port Radium was simply abandoned. The structures decayed. The environmental consequences were not studied or remediated. The exact extent of radioactive contamination is not fully known. In recent years, archaeologists, historians, and environmental scientists have begun to investigate Port Radium and similar sites. They've found evidence of contamination in the soil, in nearby water, and in the ecological systems around the site. The structures that remain are potentially radioactive themselves. The landscape of Port Radium is not just a monument to industrial ambition and failure, it is a place where human activity has altered the very chemistry of the land, and the contamination persists long after the last worker left. The settlement was abandoned not because economics failed, but because the resource was depleted and no longer valuable. The consequences of that extraction, the environmental damage, the radioactive contamination, the alteration of the land itself, were left behind, unexamined and unremediated, in one of Earth's most remote locations. What makes Port Radium the culmination of this countdown is not its physical abandonment, but this deeper truth. In Canada, just as in all wild places, humans leave scars that persist far longer than the structures we build. The wilderness may reclaim the wooden buildings and the metal machinery, but some impacts, the radioactive elements transformed by human industry, the toxins that will remain dangerous long after the last survivor has forgotten where they are buried, these are not so easily erased. Port Radium is a place where nature has not fully won, where human impact persists in forms that will take centuries or millennia to heal. A fitting finale to our countdown of Canada's secret forgotten places, a reminder that what we build and abandon shapes the land far longer than we remain to see it. Thank you for watching this exploration of Canada's hidden corners. Make sure to subscribe to see more forgotten places from across the continent. Share this with friends who love Canadian history, and I'll see you in the next video.